Hello, bright, beautiful world, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very close to home type of book review because it's from an author who I've been following here on YouTube. Her name is Jenna Moreci. She's a booktuber or author tuber here on YouTube. And this is not the first book of hers that I've read, but it is by far one of the best books I've read in a while. I'd say about the past 6 months. It's got so much action in it, so much, drama, so much to look at, so much to, take in. It's just so great. So the book that I'm reviewing today is The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci. It's a adult novel book that's got fantasy and romance and action and adventure. The premise of The Savior's Champion is the Sovereign's Tournament, which is basically a coming of age type of tournament that is done for the savior, who is like the queen of Thesson and is like this magical being that brings peace and prosperity to the land of Thesson in this fantasy world. So Tobias, our main character, is put into this tournament. Well, he goes on his own volition and enters into this tournament. And the whole price of the book is for him to go through this tournament and become the Savior's Champion, or whoever the Savior's Champion will become. So basically, our main character Tobias has a family. He has his mother and his sister is disabled. Um, what they call her in the novel is a cripple, but basically she can't walk or move with her lower half. And so he enters into the tournament for coin, or money in our case, because his family desperately needs it, and he's a laborer in his everyday life, but he wants to be an artist because his passion is with painting and art. So he enters into this tournament to gain the coin for his family, and that is where the novel starts. So, how I want to do book reviews here on my channel is to start with a non-spoiler or spoiler-free type of review and then kind of weed into a more spoiler-filled review based on my reactions and how I came to enjoy and take in this novel. So basically, to begin off, I will start with the spoiler-free, and then if you want to click ahead or skip past the spoiler-filled review, I'll leave a time code in the bottom so you can see where you can skip off in case if you want to read this book, because I highly recommend it. It's a really good book. So as soon as I'm done with the reviews, both the non-spoiler and the spoiler, I will rate all of the novels that I book review out of 5 stars. So let's get to it. So to start with the spoiler-free review, Jenna brings us into a world that we've never been to before, which is the world of Thesson, and she instantly establishes this world, and you can tell that there's different parts of this world that have, a caste system type of thing, and our main character Tobias is not a part of a higher caste, he's part of the lower, more common, what they would call the common part of the caste, and it's just instantly hits you with this kind of ancient Greece or like rural type of, feel, and you're definitely given a lot of detail, not too much to overwhelm you, but a good amount of detail that you are put into this world and you feel connected to these characters. Um, Definitely with Tobias, I will say that his mindset is very, very intellectual and he's very like into the world and what he sees. He's very cynical. So if you have a profound need to look up for cynical characters, because I know some people, they tend to do a lot of reading on what they're interested in writing about. And so having this kind of cynical mind to kind of look at and like piece together is very interesting. Another thing that I will say is that Jenna has a lot of great relationships within her novels that kind of establish what you would call the healthy relationship, and that's not only with romantic relationships, but also with platonic relationships. So with sisters, with friends, with family, those types of things. She gives you a real image of, family. You can believe that these characters are in these relationships with one another without feeling too, like, oh, this is fake. Another thing that I will say, in terms of the negative aspect of the novel, is that there are a lot of things that leave you with questions. I was hoping for a little bit more answers towards the end, and the ending was a little bit open ended, more of, whereas you could have had it closed off or have more more of a closure. And I know some people don't like those wrapped in a bow endings, but it kind of gave me a bit of a feeling of a wrapped in a bow type of ending. I wanted to feel like I was on the edge for the next novel, and of course I am, because I love her writing style and it's really, really easy. It's very conversational, as if you're being told the story like before bedtime. But I did want more at the end. I felt like the ending was more abrupt than anything else. And I know that she has two other novels that are coming with this. It's a part of a trilogy. But at the same time, I don't think the ending was as perfectly done as it could have been. There was a lot more questions that I had than answers, and I wanted to know more about these different characters rather than have it be open ended. Um, Despite all of that, this novel is really great. And I know that some people will think that it's a bit daunting. It is a bit of a thicker book. It's 555 pages, which some people, when they hear that, they'll think, oh, I don't want to read a novel that's that long because it's just going to drag on forever. But Jenna has a great pacing with the novel. There wasn't a part where I had to put it down or felt like I needed to put it down or give it time to like simmer with me. I read it all through in a day, and then I had another reread through it the next day. So it's not something that you would find hard to read. It's definitely very, in capturing and a very interesting novel to read. So definitely read that. Okay, now into the spoiler-filled review where I will get a little bit more nitpicky on some of the plot details, some of the, minute aspects that are in the novel, specific scenes. So if you do plan on reading this novel or you do hope to read this novel in the future, I would say please skip to the time code that I will leave right here and, you know, kind of just have your own go with it so that you're not spoiled. Okay, so let's get started with the very beginning of the novel. I'm gonna start with the negative things or the things that could be improved on first so that I can end on a more positive, more happy note. So, the very first thing that I noticed within the novel was that some of the dialogue was very kind of forced and not as intentional, kind of just felt like it was exposition for the reader to kind of start to get hooked into this world, which she did beautifully by describing the land and how it looks. But I felt like the initial beginning with Tobias and his sister and his mother at the dinner table felt forced and not exactly, you know, perfect in a way. Like, it kind of seemed like Jenna was trying to start us off with this family bond, but it felt like each character was kind of separate from each other and not necessarily a family. Now, this does get better later on in the novel, so the family aspects do kind of grow and become better, but the very first, like, 15 pages where he's talking about his family and he actually sits down to dinner with them at the dinner table and their conversation there kind of felt forced and a little off to me in a way. I kind of was drawn out by how like unconnected the dialogue felt and how their conversation felt. And then when his best friend Milo comes in, it kind of felt abrupt, like they hadn't finished their conversation yet, and it was kind of like, oh, he's here. Like, how did we know he was coming? Did Tobias know he was coming? It didn't seem like Tobias knew he was coming, and I just needed a little bit more on that. Maybe like a little exposition from Tobias in terms of his thoughts, just a little bit more to kind of connect me to all of that. So that beginning part can be a little jarring, but it definitely wasn't enough to sway me from keep reading. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about in terms of the negative aspects was that Tobias is an artist. He has a passion for art, he has a passion for painting, for drawing, and I didn't feel it. Every time Tobias was supposed to paint or he was supposed to do art, he couldn't. And I understand, having the art block because I also tend to do art on the side, and usually when I feel like doing art, it's like a spurge or a feeling of wanting to put something on the page, not really, an art like block. So I'm not a constant artist, I'm like a side artist. But in the same time, I get that he hasn't done art for 2 years and he hasn't picked up a pencil or colors, but at the same time, when you're passionate about something, I feel like it's kind of like riding a bike. Even if you did it 20 years ago, as soon as you hit that bike, you're going to know how to do it. And when he needed to do it, he didn't. Or it became inconvenient because he did art that he wasn't supposed to share with anybody else, like the paintings and the portraits he did of Layla. And I completely understand that. But at the same time, he's an artist, and I wanted him to see things as an artist would. So, usually, when we look at different things, people will see things differently through their own perspective. So, as an artist, you're going to see colors that you want to put onto a page. Like, you're going to see a sunset, and you're going to think of a sunset in a certain way, and even think of painting that type of portrait of that sunset. And I felt like Tobias didn't do that enough. So I know Jenna has talked about this before, that she's not very into the long descriptors and the complete world building of like describing everything in great detail. And I don't want to sit there and read tens of pages of just full on description. But at the same time, I wanted Tobias to see the world differently in some other way, not kind of just be like, oh, look, a mural. I wanted him to be like the colors of the mural, or to look at the sunset and say, an orange he'd never seen before, or something small and minute like that, just to kind of pinpoint, like, yes, this man is an artist. This man knows his colors, he knows what he's doing, and he wants to paint this portrait, if that makes sense. I just needed him to have a little bit more of that artistry in him to make me fully believe that he was an artist and not just someone who enjoyed painting or creating portraits, if that makes any sense at all. Hopefully, if you've read the book or if you are planning to read the book, this will make sense once you read. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the deaths that occur in the novel. So, one of the first deaths that kind of hits Tobias in the gut is his best friend Milo. So, Milo also joins the tournament with Tobias, and he is one of the first ones to die within the first, like, 20 pages. um, and I wanted Milo to have more of an impact. Like, I felt the shock of his death, and I felt empathetic pain for Tobias because this was his best friend, and I could feel the connection between the two, but I didn't feel connected to Milo at all. So when he did die, I was kind of like more fuel for Tobias. I didn't completely grieve over the fact that Milo died. And yes, she portrayed Tobias's feelings of Milo's death perfectly. He's constantly thinking about it throughout the tournament. He's thinking about how his best friend died for someone he doesn't even need to die for, and it makes sense. But at the same time, I kind of think that there wasn't enough in there for the reader to kind of completely feel this sympathy and empathy for Tobias about his best friend's death, because Milo wasn't given that much screen time, if you will. So I needed a little bit more for his death to make an impact. One of the deaths that really hit me home and had me reacting for like 15 minutes, full on raging out loud, was Xander's death. So right before their challenge, Enzo and Tobias have a conversation. So this is after Enzo finds Layla and Tobias in her tent, and he then has a conversation with Tobias about Xander and their relationship. And I thought that was a great scene, great and perfect. But at the same time, as soon as they had that conversation, I knew that either Enzo or Xander was going to die. And in this case, I had a stronger feeling towards Xander dying than Enzo because of the fact that Enzo seemed to have such an attachment to Xander, which was beautifully written, beautifully done. But I also saw his death coming, and it did really, really piss me off. Like, it was written beautifully to the point where I was reacting, and it was a great scene, but at the same time, I saw it coming. So some of the plot twists that I will talk about later were kind of like obvious to me. Like, I saw some of them coming. And this was one of the ones that I personally saw almost instantly from that conversation. Another thing that I will say about that scene is that I thought that Enzo's rage was written beautifully, perfectly done, and I thought that Caesar's death was well deserved because he killed a man for no reason. And so I thought that that scene was perfectly written. I just wanted maybe a little less obviousness to it. It felt kind of like Jenna knew she needed to set up, hey, this man is gonna die, so how should I do that in the best heart-wrenching way? Which she did it beautifully, but at the same time, it was a little more obvious than I kind of would have wanted it to be, but still a great scene nevertheless. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was one of the very last moments in the book, and it's their last trial of the tournament, and it's Tobias pitted against his main enemy, which is Kaleo. And he's supposed to be our one of our main antagonists. We have quite a few in this book, but he's one of the main ones, and it's stated right off the bat that he's an assassin, which is perfectly fine for his character, which actually makes sense once you see some of the events that happen in the book. But something that I thought could have used a little bit more for the ending was that it felt like Jenna was putting Kaleo in this kind of like stereotypical, villain who's kind of like psychotic and is like out there and like extravagant, and I didn't think that fit for an assassin. He does have these snide remarks throughout the entire book, and he has like these moments where they could be funny, even though they're very dark, which is fine, which is great. She did them very, well done in the book. But at the same time, I felt like his character didn't have enough at the very end for me to kind of feel that, like, yes, oh my god, he's dead, or, like something to make me that pitted against him. It kind of just felt like he was crazy. And I didn't want a crazy villain. I wanted a character who has, a storyline. Why is he an assassin? Why does he feel he needs to kill Tobias? Is it just because of the coin, or is it because he's found this reason to, hate Tobias because Tobias is always a good guy? I wanted something to pinpoint why he became this kind of crazy, almost psychotic guy at the end. And he throws out these comments that he's kind of been throwing out the entire time throughout the novel, but I didn't understand some of them because they didn't make complete sense. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was the relationships. Again, as I've mentioned them, they have a very, well, let me say that again. So I wanted to talk about relationships, and one of the main relationships is between Tobias and Layla, who is his love interest. And I felt that Jenna set up a very healthy, very great relationship. There's moments with consent, there's moments with talking things out, and she even shows some motions of unhealthy relationships between Tobias and Cosma, and how she used a parallel between Tobias and Layla talking about consent, and then how Cosma completely disregards consent when she's with Tobias. So I thought that was beautifully done. But at the same time, I felt like Tobias was a little too obsessed with Layla in certain points. Some of their topics and some of their conversations felt like he was more attached to Layla than Layla was to him, which happens all the time, makes sense. But at the same time, I felt like there were moments where he was unhealthy, obsessed with her, to the point where it seemed like when he was obsessed with her, she wasn't obsessed with him. Um, Kind of just moments where it didn't seem like the love was completely double-sided, um, which can happen all the time in relationships, but there are moments where Layla does show her love and her appreciation for Tobias, and it kind of didn't make those moments of disconnect make sense. So, I don't know, maybe you won't see it as you read, or if you've already read it, but I felt like there needed to be a little bit more behind the romance in the relationship, just because it happens as quickly as it does. This is a 30-day tournament, so I mean, if you're gonna have a romance that happens within 30 days, I feel like there needs to be a bit more substance behind it. And if you're gonna have one main character be obsessed with the love interest and the love interest not kind of reciprocate or show that, I don't know. I don't think that completely builds the relationship in the right way. And she might show that with The Savior Sister, which is the next book she has coming out, which is all about Layla's point of view from the tournament and even before that and a little bit after the tournament. Maybe she'll show a little bit more of her love for Tobias through there, but for this novel specifically, I needed a little bit more on that. So the next thing that I want to talk about are the plot twists. So this will kind of feed into the positivity and the good things that I have to say about this novel, some things that I really thought worked really well. Um, but one of the things that I thought was kind of a little too obvious for me was the fact that, major spoiler, Layla is the savior. So Cosmo is not really the savior, Layla is the savior. And I kind of saw that coming, just because of the way that, I don't know, the way that Jenna talked about the novel and the way that the novel is set up. I kind of saw it coming, um, which leads into the idea that Cosma is the savior when she's not. So, two characters that I really thought needed a little bit more background or a little bit more information on them were Cosma and Vrontis. So, Vrontis is Layla's father, which is the sovereign and who is the basically mastermind behind this whole tournament. He's the one who makes it, he's the one who runs it, um, and he absolutely hates Tobias. So, there you go, another villain, which is great. He was a great villain, great guy. Not in that sense. He's a great person for the story. But I just needed a little bit more background on Cosmo and Vrontis. I didn't understand was why Cosmo had to be the one to be the ploy savior for the entire novel. And I just didn't understand what exactly about her made her so special that she had to do it. I get why Delphi couldn't do it. I get why Pippa couldn't be it. But at the same time, why Cosma? And we don't get enough of Cosma for me to completely care what happens to her. We don't even know what happens to her after. There's a bunch of questions that I had about that. I just needed more background on Vrontis and Cosma, and maybe that would have changed a couple of things or some of the questions that I had. But I think just a little bit more detail on those characters would have been a lot better suited, I guess, for the novel. Another thing that I wanted to briefly mention was the world building. So this will be the official tie-in to the good things. But I noticed that towards the end of the tournament, there is a queen there is a king there, and there is a monarch. And each one has a very individual character. Like, they're beautifully done characters. They have their own personalities, perfect standalone characters. But at the same time, I thought that it was established kind of closer to the beginning that the savior is the only queen. She is supposed to be the only, monarch. She's supposed to be the only form of royalty, the only person who's supposed to be the queen of all the lands. And that was another thing I didn't understand. So, Thessin is the world that we're in at the time. But at the same instance, there's also other lands that these kings, queens, and monarchs are in charge of. And I wasn't sure where they fit in Thessin, if they were a part of Thessin or if they're completely out of Thessin. Are they little towns? Are they little kingdoms? I wasn't completely sure. And they also didn't seem to follow the same rules as Thessin or as the sovereign and the savior. So when they're talking to the competitors and they're talking to the sovereign when they're doing the bid on the competitors in the novel, I wasn't completely sure what they were supposed to be ruling over because they seem to follow the sovereign's rules. But then when Rosebud makes a comment about not wanting to follow the sovereign's rules, I wasn't like, I couldn't understand if they were a part of Thessin, if they were supposed to be following the sovereign and the savior, or if they were just outside kingdoms that didn't have to follow the savior or the sovereign. And in that case, I was wondering if there were people who were non-believers. Are there people who don't believe in the savior and think that the savior is just a ploy so that the sovereign can have power? Do they know that the savior has power? I had so many questions about that, and I wanted to get some clarification on these different kingdoms and these different people that seemed to also be royalty but didn't have, like, it was confusing. So next I want to go into the positivity of this novel. It's great. I highly recommend it. It's very fast-paced in the sense of that it has good pacing. It moves along quickly to the point where you're not going to be bored anywhere. It's not too much action where you feel like, goodness gracious, there's too much to take in. There are some slow moments where you can kind of just be there, and it's great. So one things that I wanted to talk about that was filled with positivity was Jenna's world building. So Jenna constantly talks about how to build the world and how to make it follow its own rules and the importance of it, and I thought she did a great job with her own advice. So her descriptions of the land were perfect enough that they weren't too long and wordy, but they also weren't short enough that I didn't know where I was or didn't know what I was looking at. And I thought it was great. There was nowhere that I didn't see that she didn't follow her own rules. There wasn't anywhere, um, stated rules, minus the whole, aspect of Thesson and the different kings and queens. There wasn't anywhere in terms of the labyrinth that I found that she didn't have rules that she didn't follow. Um, the labyrinth, by the way, every single time they were in the labyrinth was beautifully done. I could follow along with each character. I was there on the edge of my seat. There wasn't a point where I wasn't like, oh my god, where am I? What am I doing? I could follow along with these characters perfectly. I knew where I was, I knew what they were doing, and it was just beautifully done. And for something to be so complex like that, I commend her fully for it because it was just so crazy amazing to see these different challenges that these competitors had to go through, to see people, dying like flies because of the harsh forms of these trials and these challenges that they had to go through. And I also like the sweet subtlety of having those intellectual or the artistic challenges where it tested their intelligence and their creativity and their love and devotion to the savior. So I thought it was really well done. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was it was a great plot twist. Even though I knew what it was a great plot twist because that sets up the fact that the two love interests will end up together no matter what, because Layla is the official savior. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was great relationships, and great characters. So Delphi is by far one of my favorites. Not only is she an African American woman, she is also a lesbian, so we loved that greatly. There's a lot of diversity in this book that I think just really, is great and picks at things that we are experiencing now in our everyday lives, and in our current time. So I thought it was great, well done. Delphi was one of the stronger characters, I will say. I could see her clearly, I could hear her clearly. I could follow her along. I was looking for her everywhere because she was just such a great character. Another one that I really loved was Pippa. I wanted a little bit more information on her, but she has a great character. And she was just so lovable and so amazing. Of course, Tobias is a great main character. You can follow him clearly, and I commend her for writing a male point of view main character. I've dealt with it in the past, and I can say that I've had my trials and tribulations with it, but I do feel like Jenna hit the mark on that. And to follow 20 men, not only just one man, but 20 men, well done, beautifully. I thought she did a great job with that. I think Layla was a great main character. I did want a little bit more on her past because she does talk about her past quite a bit, and I'm sure we'll get that in The Savior's Sister, which is the next book. But I did want a little bit more information on Layla. But I think that she's set up perfectly. I can see her clearly, I can hear her clearly, and I thought that their meet cute or their very first meeting was well done, especially because it sets up Layla's character and Tobias's character flawlessly. Let's see. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty guys, so that was my review of The Savior's Champion. If you have any questions about this novel or just want to know more about it, you can always comment down below or hit me up at my Instagram, which I will leave right here, and you can follow that. For my rating of this novel, this great novel right here, I'm giving this novel a 5 out of 5 stars, simply because I read it so quickly within a time period where I wasn't sure about reading. And I will say that most people saw that it was daunting because of like the page numbers, which I had a little bit of that feeling because it was so thick and such a big book. But I read it within a day. I'm a bit of a fast reader, so that might not be the same for everybody. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening. That is my book review on The Savior's Champion by Jenna Massey. I will link her booktube down below so that you can follow her and watch her videos also. And if you want to order this book, she has some websites. I'll leave her website down below. But thank you so much for listening to my book review of The Savior's Champion, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!